In 1881, Oscar Wilde was notorious for his wit and eccentric clothing, yet had written only one small book of poetry. When composers Gilbert and Sullivan introduced Bunthorne in their opera Patience, London audiences instantly believed the sensitive, arts-loving character to be a parody of Wilde. Patience became a huge success in North America as well. To further publicize the show, impresario Richard Doyley Carte hired Oscar himself to tour North America. So, on October 4th, 1882, Oscar Wilde arrived in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Wilde had been preceded by his manager, who provided copy for newspaper reporters.
All lovers of the beautiful in life and nature will have the privilege of listening to Oscar Wilde in the City Hall this evening. The subject of his lecture will be the practical application of the principles of aesthetic theory to exterior and interior house decorations, with observations upon dress and personal ornamentation. Already most of the reserved seats have been filled, and those remaining will be in great demand today. The enterprise that prompted Mr. H. Smith and Mr. Kerr to negotiate for the appearance of Oscar Wilde in Fredericton will be amply rewarded.
The lecture was attended by a varied group of Frederictonians, reporters from several newspapers, to observe and report the evening, members of the social elite there to fraternize with Wilde, students from the University of New Brunswick, for whom Wilde represented youthful rebellion, members of the aspiring middle class, eager to be taught the appreciation of beauty, where to find it, and how to install it in their homes. And finally, the young writer Charles G.D.Roberts, then principal of the York Street School, whose only book of poetry was self-published.
We are told that this is a practical age, and in the rush of businessmen do not have time for delicate ornaments. That in the rush to catch a train, a man cannot stop to examine the pattern of the carpet he is stepping over. We are told that if articles in everyday use are only honestly made, we are satisfied they are not ornamental. Indeed, honesty of work is essential to progress in a practical age. Yet is this an honest age? This century has been marked by more dishonest workmanship and has produced more rubbish than any that preceded it. Any householder that attempts to furnish a new residence discovers this in his carpets, which are badly designed, badly woven, and dyed with cheap aniline dyes. Furniture is machine-made and becomes split and twisted in less than 5 years' time. It is a wonder we do not live out of doors. We must not be deceived by the attempt to draw the fine line of distinction between what is beautiful and what is useful. Utility is always on the side of the beautifully decorated article and the skill of the workman. You have here one of the essentials of art, sunshine. I hope you never allow your city to become polluted with the smoke of factories and tall chimneys, which no man has the right to bring within our midst. When you come across an English manufacturing town, the country seems to have been desolated by an army. The trees refuse to blossom, the fields to yield their flowers, and the river has lost all its natural colors. This is an outrage. No one has the right to pollute the air and the water, which are the common inheritance of all. We should leave those for our children, as we inherited them.
Oscar Wilde, this famous and ever-popular individual, drew a large audience in the City Hall last night, all anxious to see and hear him. The reserved seats were all taken, and the body of the house was well filled. Oscar made his appearance among a fine parlor view, which was arranged according to his aesthetic ideas. The lecture lasted an hour, during which time the audience preserved their patience wonderfully. The college boys came in en masse, each with a cane and bouquet, and occupied the front row of seats, from whence uproarious applause could be heard at intervals. The lecture was a financial success.
However, certain members of the audience attending the lecture had a rather different point of view of the evening's events, specifically the behavior of the students.
To the editor of the Fredericton Evening Capital. Sir, I was present at City Hall on Wednesday evening to hear Oscar Wilde, whose fame had preceded him as a man of refinement and culture. Excellent presence and voice, language and action. And although I do not subscribe to the whole of his aesthetic doctrine, I must say that had I been permitted to hear all that the lecturer had said and catch his meaning in sundry portions, I'm sure it would have proved much more satisfactory to me. After the lecture had commenced, about 5 minutes, some 25 students, as they are called, marched in procession Indian file into the hall and all the way down to the front seats, which it seems had been reserved for them. The interruptions, nay, the insults to which the speaker was subjected to throughout by a gang of young men from the university was not only trying to him, but disgusting to the whole audience. If the people of Fredericton are to be insulted in this way by these unmanly fellows, the sooner precautionary steps are taken, the better. Now, Mr. Editor, if these young men have not better manners than to display it on occasion, they will be taught a lesson on the next public occasion that will help them in the same way that the criminal is helped, by forcible means.
The university took a more lenient view on the students' behavior. A large number of students attended Oscar Wilde's lecture on the decorative arts on the 4th. By their frequent and animated applause, they showed that their sentiments were entirely in accord with those of the eloquent lecturer. It is to be regretted that their appreciation of the lecture was misinterpreted by some.
They were very intelligent-looking boys, all of them. They had their fun, and I did not mind.
Following the lecture, a reception was held. There, Charles G.D.Roberts was introduced to Oscar Wilde, who invited Roberts back to his room at the Queen's Hotel. Despite Fredericton's status as a dry city under the Canadian Temperance Act, Roberts and Wilde obtained some gin and ginger beer. They poured a libation to the gods of Greece and Rome, then seated themselves at either end of the table and read their poems to each other. They found their aspirations and interests to be remarkably similar. Roberts described his feelings in a letter to fellow Fredericton poet Bliss Carman.
I had a long letter from Oscar Wilde, announcing that with the beginning I had made, he didn't believe there could be any heights in song beyond my reach. That's pretty steep coming from an Englishman. I am so glad to hear you praise as you do Wilde's splendid Ave Imperatrix. I have a very high opinion indeed of Wilde's possibilities. I expect a great deal of him. He is a good friend of mine. I am counting confidently on your doing something for Canada, with the rest of us, that small body who are pinning their faith on the near approaching awakening of Canada, and politics, art, song, intellectual effort generally. I feel it in my bones that within a very few years, there's going to be lots for us to do in Canada, and the very best of us young men will be wanted to do it. Do what? We'll see when the time comes. Let us meanwhile be ready.
Unlike so many others, Roberts retained his high opinion of Oscar Wilde, even after Wilde's social disgrace of 1895. Roberts battled apathy and poverty to create and defend Canadian writing. Knighted in 1935, Sir Charles G.D.Roberts is considered the father of Canadian poetry.